Hello, everyone. Welcome to Ravenstar's Witching Hour. I'm your host and head witch, Miss Solaris BlueRaven at the helm this evening. I want to give a shout out to everybody at Revolution Radio, staff, producers, listeners, chat room, and thank everybody for tuning in tonight. We are 100% listener supported, so if you like what you're hearing, please click on the donate button. We appreciate your support, and thank you for any contribution you can make to this excellent station. And please consider investing in our monthly archives. For a small fee each month, you can access all radio shows at Revolution Radio. It's a great and inexpensive investment, to say the least. And you are listening to Studio A, and my special guest this evening is Brent Holland. And Brent has a stellar bio, which I hope to do justice to this evening, and has an incredible new book out called JFK Assassination. You can order a copy at nightfrightshow.com. Let me read you his bio. I hear him in the background there. So Brent has 2 broadcast shows, both focused on students, high school, college, university, and all the rest of us at all ages. Both are a volunteer show and put on by a staff of 1, Brent Holland. Brent Holland's show interviews with international and national legends, including prime ministers, Nobel laureates, icons, and legends. And Night Fright, #1 show of its genre in Canada, is on Tuesdays at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time here on Revolution Radio on Studio B, which is awesome. He has a phenomenal list of guests that he has interviewed. It's very, very impressive, and the list goes on and on and on. And if you've tuned into his show, then you will know exactly what I'm talking about. Brent Holland is a multi-award-winning music composer for feature films and television, having composed for NASA, ABC, CBS, NBC, Fox, PBS, CBC, SRC, CTV, TVA, TQS, Global, etc., and also in Vietnam, France, Turkey, Great Britain, and Europe. That's pretty impressive. His score for the Canadian feature film 21 Brothers, about Canadians in the trenches of World War I, is in the Guinness World Book of Records. Holland has a BFA in music and a BFA in theater design, which quotes lighting, having worked extensively in this area with Bon Jovi, Michael Jackson, Rod Stewart, and yes, and I'm sure many, many others. He has a YouTube page called youtube.com/user/Night Fright Show. Also, he has nightfrightshow.blogspot.ca and brenthollandshow.blogspot.ca. Wow. And please welcome Brent to the show this evening. Hi, Brent.
Hi, Solaris. Thank you so much. And, you sent me your address before, so indeed your check is in the mail for all that. I want to thank you. That's really sweet of you.
Oh, my goodness. What an impressive bio you have there. I'll tell you what. And that's just the tip of the iceberg.
What's that? It's all made up. I just said it to try and get a job.
Yeah, well, I guess it works pretty well because you have an awesome show, and I'm very, very happy to have you on tonight. I was telling you off air, you have that nice personality that's just so nice to listen to, and very friendly. It's like a relative, so I really enjoy you. So I just wanted to thank you for all you do.
You're very welcome. Thank you. It's kind of like Freddy Krueger, I guess, my personality. Thank you so much. No way. But we have a lot to talk about tonight, and I do want to talk about your book for sure. And it's really phenomenal. So you wrote a book called JFK Assassination. From the Oval Office to Dealey Plaza.
Excellent. And how long has that been out?
That has just been released in the past month.
Excellent.
And you can get it at Amazon. I guess what makes it different than all the other assassination books is the fact that I was able to sit across from Ted Sorensen for an afternoon. Ted Sorensen, folks, was JFK's speechwriter and closest aide during the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962. It was Ted that JFK tasked to write the letter to Khrushchev at the Soviet Union to get the Soviet Union to back down in the Cuban Missile Crisis. We were so close, Ted told me that Jacqueline Kennedy had called the president, JFK, to bring the kids home to the White House because they were out of the White House at that time. No nuclear-proof bunker below the White House either. And she wanted to bring the kids home, little Carolyn and John Jr., because she thought they were all going to die the next day. That's how close we were.
Oh, my goodness. Wow, it's amazing. And I was just a little kid because I entered the world in 1963. So very interesting. Yeah, that's phenomenal. And I want to talk in detail about that. That's pretty impressive that you talked with Ted Sorensen. That's pretty impressive.
Thank you. That's kind of you. Now, Solaris, I'm looking at your picture right now. There's no way you were born in 1963.
I was. It's my vampire look.
I think it's 1993. I think you should have that checked.
Well, bless your heart. Well, thank you very much. You're very kind. Yeah. I'm getting old. What can I say? But getting serious here, I know I could kid around with you for hours. I don't know. But anyways, we'll get serious. But so let's start with, in the book, you have a chapter called 7 Smoking Guns, Proof of a Conspiracy. Can you elaborate on that?
I sure can. there are many, many smoking guns when it comes to the JFK assassination, but I picked 7 of the main ones that I feel really support the fact that indeed there was a conspiracy in the assassination of JFK. And I even have what I consider confirmation of conspiracy from Ted Sorensen. But I guess I can give your audience one for sure, and this is one that many people don't know about. JFK had 2 great aides in a fellow by the name of Kenny O'Donnell and Dave Powers. Both were in the follow-up car, the Secret Service car, right behind JFK's limousine. And when the shots rang out, they saw the shots coming from the grassy knoll. Why that's important is because the Warren Commission, which was set up just after the assassination to investigate the JFK assassination, claimed that all the shots originated from one single shooter, Lee Harvey Oswald, from behind the president. Well, if shots are coming from in front of the president on that infamous grassy knoll that I'm sure most people have heard of, that means 2 shooters. And then by definition, that's conspiracy. They were asked to keep that information to themselves by the government for national security reasons. Now, to give you an idea of who Kenny O'Donnell was, there's a terrific movie out there called 13 Days, which covers the October missile crisis of 1962, the Cuban Missile Crisis. And Kevin Costner plays Kenny O'Donnell. And that'll give you a very good idea of how close he was to JFK. And that a guy like that wouldn't lie and make stuff up.
Exactly.
Yeah, so there you go. There's 6 more in the book as well.
My goodness.
And all kinds of stuff.
You know, it's really interesting. It makes you wonder what kind of world we would have today if he had survived and wasn't assassinated. And I tend to believe that we would have had a much better world.
I agreed wholeheartedly. For one thing, the Vietnam War would have ended. He was pulling people out, and he had planned to take all American advisors, they were called in those days, in 1963. He wanted them all out by 1965. Instead, just after his death, President Johnson, who took over, he was vice president at the time, and once JFK was assassinated by the powers that be, he was made president, and he escalated the war in Vietnam. And that's a whole subject, and many, many books have been written on that for sure. But for sure, Ted told me that he was JFK was taking the personnel out, and there would not have been a Vietnam War. If there was no Vietnam War, there's a very good chance that Nixon wouldn't have come to power. We wouldn't have had Watergate. We wouldn't have had all the successions of world events that have happened and taken place since then. There's a good chance the Cold War would have ended a lot sooner too, and it might not be ramping up again the way it is right now. Right.
Yeah, it seems like corruption kind of bled through after he left, and of course, I think this country has been haunted. To be honest, there's just an ominous presence of energetic here in this country that just seems to linger. I don't know if it's the lying or the corruption blended together, but there's definitely something that haunts this country right now. And I appreciate this book you're putting out. I really do, and the fact that you actually had conversation with legitimate sources really makes it more intriguing to read.
Thank you very much. It's once again, it's very kind of you.
Oh, my pleasure.
Very, very fortunate in the folks that I've been able to interview about the assassination. First-person witnesses like Dr. Robert McCullough, who worked on JFK when he was brought into the emergency room, and he tells his whole story. The second JFK was ushered in through the emergency room, JFK was still alive. His brain was gone. I don't want to give the illusion that he was conscious. He was gone for all intents and purposes. But what is amazing is the fact that they pulled out all the stops. They did what they did to try and save and resuscitate the president. And he tells, of course, of Jackie's reactions through it all, and how Jackie, I'll give you this too, Jackie had parts, everybody's seen the Zapruder film, that famous film that's in the movie JFK. It's the most popular film of the JFK assassination, the one where Kevin Costner in the movie JFK goes back and to the left. We all see Jackie jump out onto the trunk. Many people have speculated she was trying to escape the gunshot. She was shocked. She wasn't doing that at all. What she did was she jumped on the back of the trunk to get a piece of JFK's brain. And she held it in her hand and gave it to the doctors and said, will this help save my husband? That's the insanity of the moment.
Wow.
And Dr. Robert McClellan takes us right through that, including the last rites. Something very ominous is the fact that he witnessed the back of JFK's head blown out, which means, again, a frontal shot, the bullet entering in the front of JFK's head and exiting the back. It's always a bigger wound where it exits, always. And so once again, a frontal shot, 2 shooters. When he saw the autopsy photos, they weren't what he witnessed in the surgery room that day trying to save JFK. It showed there was no shots taken of the back of JFK's head, no photos at all. The one that had a photo of JFK's head showed a completely intact head. That's evidence of conspiracy and cover-up.
And let me ask you, was a body double used in the autopsy, in the photos?
I can't speak to that. There is speculation, of course.
Mm-hmm.
David Lifton has done extensive research on that, and you could find his show that I've done on Revolution Radio and www.nightfrightshow.com. You can find his evidence there. I can't speak to that. I don't know.
I'm just curious. I've heard many people mention that before. So yeah, it seems like the more we unravel, the more there is to access insofar as these data goes. So,
yes, very much so.
Yeah, it's almost and obviously it's infuriating to some degree because of how people have been deceived. Once again, it's pretty sad. But I was going to ask you about James. Is it Tague? How do you say that name?
James Tague. Yes.
Okay, and how he became responsible for what we know as the magic bullet.
Oh, sure. I'd be happy to tell you that. Okay. God love James. Last November, I was going to do a little bit of bragging here, and that's not what I'm intending. I'm just trying to give context and set the story up straight. Last November 22nd, 2013, was the 50th. Here comes the rain. Maybe you can hear it.
Cool.
That's very cool. If it gets too much, I'll close the window.
Oh, it's fine. Yeah, it's fine.
It was the 50th anniversary of the assassination, the memorial, and I was the only Canadian invited to go down and speak because of my friendship with Ted Sorensen, JFK's speechwriter and closest aide. I met James Tague down there, and he passed away just recently, I would say 3 months ago. So what's in the book is virtually historical because it's in his own words. As the same thing flies true with Ted Sorensen, it is virtually his last interview because he died. Geez, I got to stop interviewing these guys because they died just after I interviewed them.
Is it under normal circumstances or anything suspicious?
Nothing suspicious, except I think it's just coincidence. But Mr. Sorensen died just after getting off the phone with the White House. He was speaking with Obama. And I don't think there's anything ominous there. He had taken a stroke on 9/11, actually. And this was his second stroke, and he passed away because of it. Wow. So I don't think there was anything ominous, to be honest with you. I think it was just coincidental. But Mr. Tague, there was nothing ominous there. He was well into his 80s, if I'm not mistaken. He became responsible for the magic bullet, and just by coincidence, just by being in Dealey Plaza that day. Most people are aware of the fact that President Kennedy was shot that day, and also Governor Connolly, who was sitting in front of President Kennedy, was also wounded. Well, the Warren Commission was set up, as I said before, by President Johnson in 1964 to investigate the assassination that had only taken place approximately a month before. We're looking at November 22nd. It was set up and instituted in January of 1964. Their conclusion, their first report conclusion, there would be two, but their first one said that there was 3 bullet shells found on the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository. That's behind the president. And that all the shots emanated from the 6th floor and were done by one lone shooter by the name of Lee Harvey Oswald. So they said, okay, the first shot we know hit the president in the back. The second shot we know hit Governor Connolly in the back and caused 5 wounds. And we know there was a kill shot that took President Kennedy's head off. So there we go. Nice, neat, tidy package. All 3 bullets accounted for 3 wounds. 2 in the president, 1 in Governor Connolly. All of a sudden, in June now, this is a full 6 months later, a fellow by the name of James Tague comes forward and says, wait a second, I was wounded too. How do you explain that? So now they've got a major problem. They've got 3 bullet casings and 4 bullets out of the 4 wounds to explain. So how do you do this? So we have to start eliminating shots. Now, we know for a fact James Tague was wounded because there's pictures of him with a Dallas police officer giving him aid. Now, when I say wounded, he was hit on the cheek by either debris or a small fragment of the bullet. We're not quite sure, and nobody's been able to ascertain exactly how he was wounded, but definitely he was wounded. So we have to start eliminating bullets. So we know for sure there was a kill shot on JFK, his headshot. So there's 1 bullet gone. Mm-hmm. Okay. We know for sure Governor Connolly was hit. So there's 2. And now we've got James Tague into the picture. So now we've got James Tague, the president, and we have 1 bullet to account for a wound in JFK's back, a wound in JFK's throat, which all the doctors said was an entry wound, and 5 wounds in Governor Connolly, who was sitting in front of JFK, hence the magic bullet. Mm-hmm. So the magic bullet, they claim, goes into JFK's back, somehow at a downward angle. It doesn't hit any bone or anything inside of JFK's body, but it miraculously decides to go up because it's headed down to exit his chest virtually. It goes up and exits his throat. Now it's heading into the sky now. It stops in midair and decides it's going to go down and into the back of Governor Connolly.
Really? Is it a smart bullet or what?
Oh, yeah, it's genius.
Yeah.
You know, it's the amazing Kreskin bullet. I mean, it just goes everywhere, this thing. It smashes his Governor Connolly's rib. It breaks his wrist. And this bullet is found in Parkland Hospital on a gurney, completely intact with no deformation whatsoever. But what's even wilder is there's no tissue or blood on it.
Very suspicious.
So, yeah, it's not possible.
Right. And what's interesting is did people question this back then, or were they just kind of complying?
One man did question the results of the Warren Commission because the Warren Commission had to scrap their first report. And this is when they invented the magic bullet and came out with their second report. And that man's name is Mark Lane. Mark Lane was JFK's New York City campaign manager. He was also the first guy to question the Warren Commission. Marguerite Oswald, Lee Harvey Oswald's mother, because Lee Harvey Oswald had been killed only 3 days later by a known mafioso by the name of Jack Ruby, and silence the assassin, and he takes all his secrets to the grave.
Right.
And Mark Lane put out a documentary called Rush to Judgment, and he could not find one publisher to publish his book or publish his documentary. He had to go to Britain to do it, and Canada, as a matter of fact, to be broadcast. And he did incredible work, and then that's when the doors started to fly open, and many other researchers jumped in and said, wait a second. And all these researchers, I should say, weren't trained in forensics. Many were just private citizens, but they cared about the truth, and they knew they weren't being given the truth. And they're patriots, and we have to commend them all for that.
Right. Yeah, that's why we're here at Revolution Radio, too.
Bingo.
You roll up your sleeves and you just get involved. That's the bottom line. And, it's interesting. Oh, go ahead.
No, that's fine.
Oh, yeah. No, you were mentioning Ted Sorensen, and obviously yours is the only book of this genre that has an exclusive first-person interview with him. So what else did he communicate to you that you can relay to the audience tonight? Anything that you'd like to share?
Sure. There's many things. He takes us right through the Cuban Missile Crisis. And I asked him point blank, I said, was there ever a fear during the Cuban Missile Crisis? I should explain what the Cuban Missile Crisis is for the younger folks that just weren't around or were born a year later, as they claim, in 1963. Right, Solaris?
It's true. That's true.
Somebody's lying to you. Check your birth certificate.
Oh, I know I'm a mutant alien, but don't tell anybody, okay?
Okay. 1962, Castro's Cuba. They had just gone through, you see, originally when they had the Cuban Revolution in 1959, they were kind of pro-America. And then all of a sudden they started to turn towards the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union was offering a bigger carrot, if you will. So all of a sudden you've got this 1959 communist regime sitting 70 miles off the shores of Florida and Cuba. Now, these were the days when the Cold War was at its height, so we should be aware of that as well. So Vice President Nixon, under Eisenhower, decided to set up an operation where he would kill Castro. This would be at the Bay of Pigs, which everybody's heard of as well, and they were going to send all these anti-Castro Cuban exiles that were living in Miami and the surrounding area into Cuba to take over the regime, to go back in and get power. So they set up the Bay of Pigs, and then all of a sudden, the weirdest thing happened. Kennedy came along, and he was running right against Nixon, and Kennedy won the election. He was not supposed to win that election. And Nixon was out. Well, he inherited this thing called the Bay of Pigs operation, and it went sour very, very quickly. What it was a setup to try and get the United States involved with a war with Cuba, and Kennedy knew that if there was a war with Cuba, because of their association with the Soviet Union, they'd be looking at a nuclear war virtually. It would be the same as if the Soviets invaded Canada. The United States wouldn't stand by for that. So he decided not to support that, and God love the Cuban exiles. Most of them were captured, and some were killed. Well, this left a very, very pissed off CIA, anti-Castro Cuban organizations, as well as the mafia. The mafia had been running the casinos right up to the point where Castro took over the island of Cuba. They had been running the casinos there, making all kinds of great money. So all that to say is Sorensen walks us through this scenario where the Soviets put offensive nuclear weapons in Cuba. The United States said, no, that's not acceptable. We have less than 3 minutes to react if you launch one of those missiles. And they're offensive. They're not defensive weapons. So then we had this confrontation, a nuclear confrontation. I asked Ted during that confrontation if there was a fear of a military coup in the United States. And he said yes. They were very worried that a general by the name of Curtis LeMay and some of the other generals might try to seize power. And they are actually on tape saying just that. Kennedy had a tape recorder going and had left the room, and these guys spoke behind his back, and that's all in the book as well. Mm-hmm. And some of the things they said were alarming and terrifying to think that they were coming from the Joint Chiefs of Staff.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, what's interesting is it makes you wonder, like I said, how much corruption we have here in the United States still, even with the CIA and other intelligence agencies. I mean, it's very concerning when you see how there's been such a cover-up and a wall of deception going on, and it just doesn't seem to end.
It keeps going on and on and on, and it's Kennedy wanted to split the CIA up too because he was deceived. I had mentioned the Bay of Pigs. The CIA had made its own report and had discovered that the Bay of Pigs was doomed to fail. They hid that report from the president before the operation took place.
Mm-hmm.
It was only found out afterwards. So when Kennedy found this out, that he'd been deceived and he'd been given a bill of goods, as Ted Sorensen told me, that all he had to do was sign on the dotted line and everything would be taken care of, he flipped out. He fired the head. Now, wait for this. He fired the head of the CIA at the time, who was Allen Dulles. Mm-hmm. Allen Dulles ended up being one of the main people on the Warren Commission investigating the very assassination of JFK, the guy who fired him.
Yeah, no coincidence there, right?
Oh, boy. It's like the Fox, virtually the Fox investigating the hen house. Mm-hmm. Virtually. So, yeah, the CIA was supposed to be broken up, and the CIA reacted very badly. Mm-hmm. And this is what ended up happening.
Yeah, it seems... Oh, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, the CIA's attitude, and a lot of these national security agencies as well, their attitude is the president comes in for 4, maybe 8 years. They're going to be there for a career of maybe 20 or 30 years.
Right.
So they don't tell him what's going on. Mm-hmm. As a matter of fact, the president doesn't have the highest security clearance in the country. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't make any sense at all.
No, it really doesn't. Yeah, they're kind of there as a host for a lot of an agenda, obviously. But it seems to me like they certainly set him up for sabotage there with Kennedy. And, what's interesting to me is, wasn't there a connection between Kennedy and Roswell or something like that?
Well, people have speculated on that. Kennedy had put out, actually, November 12th, 1963, and Kennedy was killed only 10 days later, November 22nd, 1963. He had put out a memo asking the CIA to hand over all UFO files. He was worried. Now, I guess he believed in extraterrestrials and UFOs, and he wasn't quite sure, like everybody else, what they were. But what his concern was that the Soviets might misinterpret a UFO flying over their airspace for an attack from the United States and may trigger World War III. So he put out a memo asking for all the UFO files. I don't think he ever received them. Mm-hmm.
Wow. Well, that's interesting right there, if you ask me.
Yeah, that's cover up.
Yeah, considering our underground and how we've reverse engineered a lot of exotic craft and everything else that happened after the World War II. So, yeah, it's one big web of deceit, if you ask me.
It certainly looks like that. Mm-hmm. There's certainly things that are hidden and are kept from the American people.
Right.
Yeah. And I question that culture. And it's so important. I tell my nephews all the time that question everything. Everything. Make your own mind up about it. Get the information from everywhere and then make up your own mind.
Exactly.
But question everything. There's it works the same way here in Canada too. We seem to have forgotten that the governments in Canada and the United States, every Canadian, every American has a small business, or in both cases, a big business. And that business is called government. Mm-hmm. They work for us. We don't work for them.
Yep.
And this is a dynamic, I think, that has been lost.
I so agree with you. Well, how is the pulse of Canada right now? I mean, obviously, America has some big problems right now. What's going on over there?
Well, I guess the biggest problem here is, like America, it's the lack of middle-class jobs. Mm-hmm. The middle class has been decimated. The jobs have been sent offshore. Mm-hmm. And, the corporate greed and everything else. And as I always write on the Facebook page, we need a new ism. Communism hasn't worked. Socialism hasn't worked. Monarchies haven't worked. Mm-hmm. And capitalism, I think, is the system's broken, because when we start putting people out of work because we want to make an extra $10 so the corporation looks good on paper, mm-hmm. I think there's a serious misconception with that. Once you put that person out of work, that person has no money to buy the very products you're trying to undercut your competitor with.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah,
it's suicidal.
Yeah, and our resources here. I mean, I'm sure they're trying to privatize water and this and that. I mean, there's a lot happening here in the United States where the land is being butchered by big corporations and big money, of course, and that's just not acceptable in any form or design. And most of our stuff is manufactured outside the U.S. But I can go on and on about what's happening here. It's it's just not good.
It's really not. It's the same thing in Canada.
Yeah.
Very much the same situation here. Now, Canada has two things going for it. It supplies the most oil to the United States. It has the biggest oil reserves next to Saudi Arabia, and we're a lot more stable. So I'm not saying oil is the answer, but geopolitically, I think it would be better if we increase the amount of oil and cut down on the need from the Middle East, because let's face it, that's not really a reliable source. And do you really want to be giving money to the Saudis who treat their women like chattel?
Oh, don't get me started with that one. But yes, I totally agree with you.
Go ahead.
I mean, the way they treat women is appalling. Coming from my benchmark of being, a second-degree black belt and everything else, and a very strong woman, I'm like, I would never tolerate that kind of garbage. I'll tell you what. So, yeah, I could say a lot of things about that right now, without a doubt. But yeah, I'd like to see us more fortified here in the U.S. And of course, you all fortified, where we're not extending our energy out to these other countries and relying on them for so many things that we can already create ourselves.
Exactly. And we have the most fresh water in the world in Canada.
Well, I hope you hold on to it. And how is the fracking? Do you have fracking out there?
It's just starting a little bit now.
Okay, I hope you get a grip on that, because I tell you what, it's really hitting the U.S. right now in all different areas. So I don't support that. I think it's polluting big time. So I think there are other ways.
There's other ways, and we should be exploring them and utilizing them without question.
Yeah, I didn't mean to go down a different channel here with you, but
fine.
Yeah, it's good to kind of go in a direction as guided. So anyway, but I did want to ask you about the snipers, the people that actually shot Kennedy. Has there been which identification? I mean, can you identify the snipers? Is there a record of identification? There's
no way of knowing.
Okay.
For one thing, anybody who probably did the shooting was probably silenced right after. Now, Mark Lane, the fellow I had mentioned before, who was JFK's New York campaign manager, did some research. He's a lawyer. He worked with Dr. King. He worked with Bobby. He was a freedom rider. When he was on the bus, being a freedom rider, the KKK, Ku Klux Klan, came on the bus. And he escorted them off. I'll put it that way. So much for nonviolence. I have to laugh. But he's a big guy. You don't want to mess with Mark Lane. And he did some investigating, and he came across this fellow named Jerry Patrick Hemming. And Jerry Patrick Hemming was a CIA hitman. And he put the question to him, and Jerry hemmed and hawed, and he said, yes, the CIA essentially were involved with the hit that day in Dealey Plaza.
Right. I would suspect so. And of course, wasn't Senior Bush involved in that too? Or one of them?
We don't know. Yeah. I can tell you this, though. I had a crime scene investigator on my show, and she's in the book as well. Sherry Feaster, senior crime scene investigator. You talk about strong women. She's amazing.
Good.
And and my mom too, single mom.
All right.
21st century forensic science. She examined the Zapruder film, that very famous film I was just talking about. She found a frontal shot. Now, science proves this. She's a crime scene investigator that has put criminals behind bars for 20 years using the same, just like you see on TV. It's amazing. It's the same deal. It's 21st century forensic science. And she used this same basic science on the Zapruder film, found a frontal shot that cannot be attacked. I mean, this is the science. This is where it's at. It's 1 + 1 is going to equal 2.
Exactly. Well, it's interesting is how they got away with lying about it for so long.
The cover up.
Yeah. Is it just about bullying people to a point where they were silenced? Were people intimidated and afraid?
Very much so. Witnesses were being killed off left, right, and center.
And what do you think about it today? I mean, obviously people are able to talk about it a little bit more today, so they're not getting as threatened, would you say?
Well, I think a lot of the old school boys that were involved with it have died off. I think there are a lot of records that could be opened up. I don't know if there's going to be any smoking gun records left. I think a lot of them have been purged.
Wow.
And I know that for a fact. I'll give you a good example. In 1992, 91, the movie JFK, Oliver Stone's cinematic masterpiece, came out.
Mm-hmm. Because
there was such an uproar from the American people after seeing that movie, President Clinton at the time set up something called the AARB, the Assassination Records Review Office, and they released hundreds of thousands of files. Now, the Secret Service was told specifically not to destroy any files. The very next day, they went out and destroyed all their Oswald-related files. That very, very next day. Now, that's pretty ominous in itself. I mean, they broke a direct order. Oh, completely.
Yeah, that's well, I hate to say it, but the CIA has been behind so much corruption here in the U.S. I'd like to think of them as the good guys fighting the good fight on behalf of our country, but it seems to me like it's just not the case. I mean, there are games being played out, and people are being victimized and murdered and taken out, and it's just, I can go on and on about that. It's no good. So,
it seems to be an endless cycle.
Right.
Yeah, and you don't know who's the good guy, who's the bad guy. Getting back to the Secret Service, I had interviewed a fellow that was the first African-American Secret Service agent, Abraham Bolden, and he was handpicked by JFK. JFK called him the Jackie Robinson of the Secret Service.
Wow.
And he was a whistleblower after the assassination, and he came out and he said, I was called an N, Kennedy was called an N lover, and the Secret Service said they would not protect him because he was an N lover.
Wow.
And they were drunk on duty. And sure enough, if you look at some of the pictures of the assassination that day, when the shot first rings out, they're all looking dazed and they're all looking in different directions. Nobody's moving is the point. I've never been hungover, of course, because I'm innocent. I'm in Canadian.
That's right. And that Canadian beer of yours. Yeah.
But I think we can all relate. When you're hungover, you haven't slept.
When I was younger, okay, go ahead.
Yeah, so like last year for you, I guess. And it's warm out on top of that, and you haven't slept in over 24 hours, 30 hours, and you're hungover, you're still drunk from drinking all night. You're not the sharpest tool in the shed, let's face it.
Right.
And this is exactly what was happening in Dealey Plaza that day. These guys just didn't move. Had they moved earlier, as soon as they heard the crack of the first shot that entered Kennedy's throat, he would still be alive.
Right.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to ask you, wasn't law enforcement asked to stand down or not protect him around a certain corridor or corner or something like that?
Yeah, according to the movie JFK, that's the case. Now, I couldn't confirm that for my book, but according to the movie JFK, they were asked to stand down. It's a bit of a misconception, all the open windows and stuff, because I did my own investigation on that as well. And I found many, many pictures of JFK wide out in the open with lots and lots of open windows around him. There was some that the mob was just all over him in the car, and he was sitting wide open on the back seat of a convertible, right on the trunk. So different times, different protection methods, I guess. I guess nobody just thought that anybody would want to kill such a great president.
That's so terrible.
He was so loved.
He was. And, didn't Lyndon B. Johnson keep the car or something really twisted like that? Wasn't there a story about him taking that car?
What he did, I don't think Johnson, unlike many researchers, I don't think Johnson was involved in the assassination. And I'll tell you why. Ted Sorensen told me that when JFK and Johnson were putting the civil rights legislation together, they both knew that was the end of the Democratic Party, that they would probably not get another president in with the Democratic Party because there was such opposition to it. It was Johnson, after the assassination, that forced that legislation through in memorial to JFK. And it was better legislation he got for civil rights than was originally in the original civil rights package JFK had put together. Ted Sorensen told me that. So I don't think he was involved. I don't think he was a great guy.
No, I don't think so. I've heard horror stories about him.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, that's interesting because a lot of people, they swear that he was involved. So
yeah, I did too in the beginning, especially after the movie JFK. But once I spoke to Ted Sorensen, I realized that it was not a coup d'etat. The government was not involved. The CIA were. Members of the CIA were, without question.
Okay, now who was in charge of the CIA at that point?
John McCone, but John McCone was kept out of the loop of many things that were going on in the CIA. After the Bay of Pigs, JFK had fired the then head of the CIA, Allen Dulles, the same guy who ended up heading the Warren Commission. JFK replaced Allen Dulles with a fellow by the name of John McCone. He was handpicked in the same sense that JFK handpicked the actual head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff to keep the Joint Chiefs of Staff in line. That fellow's name was Maxwell Taylor. He was so trusted by Bobby Kennedy that Bobby Kennedy ended up naming one of his sons after him. So he was a good guy. The other Joint Chiefs of Staff, not so much. But Kennedy knew something was amiss, and this is why he wanted to have his own people in place at the helm.
Oh, no kidding. That's what I would do.
Yeah,
flush all the corruption out and keep the good guys.
Unfortunately, John McCone, the CIA just operated under the radar. They just went on doing their own things. They didn't even tell President Kennedy half the stuff they were doing. Well,
they're very rogue, and they still are.
Very much they are. That's what I was saying before. Like, they look at the president and they say, he's here for 4 or 8 years. We're going to be here a lot longer. Right. Just don't tell him. We'll just keep doing our thing, right?
Yeah, wow, that's really amazing. Well, hopefully that will come to an end at some point. Although I don't know. I mean, they've been getting away with this for a very long time, so who knows?
Long time.
Yeah. But you also interviewed another first-person witness. Of course, we were talking about the actual doctor who worked on JFK. So can you elaborate a little bit more on him?
Sure, Dr. Robert McClelland. Terrific guy, very honest guy. He not only worked on JFK, but he worked on Lee Harvey Oswald 2 days later.
Wow.
And talk about... a rendezvous with history. And he tells that story complete as well. And again, that's my book. Dr. Robert McClelland, as I said, is just a young guy, and he was giving a lecture. And all of a sudden there was a knock at the door. I'll do the knock.
Is it?
He went to the door, and there was another doctor that he knew there, an emergency room doctor, and he was pale. And he said, okay, right away he knew there was something wrong. And he said, what's wrong? He said, can you come out here? I have to speak to you. And he said, we've just got word that the president's been shot and he's being rushed to Parkland Hospital. So the two of them dashed off, went downstairs. And when he got downstairs, he said there was 50 armed guys in the waiting room. And they just parted like Moses. He was like Moses, and the sea parted. And they let him through to go into the emergency room right away. When he got there, the nurses had cut all of JFK's clothes off, I think except for his underwear, because they wanted to give him some dignity because he was the president. But he said he stood virtually right over Kennedy's wound in the back of his head. He could see it very, very clearly as he bent over the president and examined the president. And they were virtually pulling at all the stops, trying to save him. They had put a tube down his throat to try and clear his lungs. They were giving him CPR constantly. They were pumping him full of blood. They were doing all kinds of amazing things. And then finally, somebody had to call him dead. But you see, Kennedy was in such great shape. He was a terrific swimmer that even though he was virtually brain dead, his body just kept on ticking. And finally, through the trauma that his body had endured, his heart just started to slow and slow and slow.
Wow.
And that was it. He was gone. But he walks us detailed through all that. He even confirms that there was cerebellum, I think he calls it, which is a portion of that's only found at the back of the brain, lying on the gurney, which means that just validates what he said. The back of JFK's head brain was shot out, because that's the only way that type of brain matter could be there.
Wow. So his brain was not functioning. He was brain dead, but the heart was still going on?
That's right.
Beating? Yeah. Wow. It's too bad they couldn't use was it cryogenics? And wouldn't that be interesting?
There was not enough brain left.
Wow.
Yeah, his brain was completely gone.
That's a shame. It's such a pointless thing. When you think about these horrific assassinations, that's obviously the worst one the United States has ever had to deal with. But it's so uncalled for on so many different levels. It really is.
Well, then we had Martin Luther King in 1968. Well, Malcolm X, 1966. And I've done a lot of interviews with people that have examined the Martin Luther King assassination, 1968, and only that was April 4, 1968. Everybody knows the U2 song, Pride.
Mm-hmm.
That's written about Dr. King. Early morn, April 4,
right.
The shot rings out in the Memphis sky.
Mm-hmm.
And it was only June 6th, a few months later, that Bobby was killed.
Right.
And it looks like a lot of the same template essentially was used over and over and over again.
Yeah, I'm sure he was on the list for a long time.
Very much so.
Well, it seems like the Kennedys, they almost have a kind of curse. I mean, I don't want to say it's a curse, but they've had some hard luck.
It's just horrendous. I mean, when you look at John Jr. and what happened there,
mm-hmm.
It's so tragic. I had met Carolyn Kennedy, and the spark is there, that Kennedy spark, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And just amazing. I'm smiling as I say it, folks, because I have such reverence for the Kennedy family. And I've become pretty good Facebook friends with David Patrick Kennedy as well, and he's got the same type of outlook.
Excellent.
That all the Kennedys have. They were rich, right? They could have walked away from all this and just been rich.
Yeah.
Put your occupation down on your tax income at the income tax papers at the end of the year and just put rich. That's enough. But they didn't.
Right.
They stopped and they tried to do service and give back to the country.
Yeah, it's a big cross to bear, too, because you become such a target in those situations, especially when there's so much corruption going on behind the scenes. It's really unfortunate because they seem like they had a really pure consciousness in association with the future of mankind and our country. So it's very sad to see that they were attacked like that.
You know, I've been very blessed with my show. I've been able to interview prime ministers of Canada, Nobel Peace laureates, all these amazing people, sports icons, and all these incredible people, absolutely incredible people. But Ted Sorensen, let me tell you, he stands out like I've never met or come close to meeting somebody with such a global vision for peace. Mm-hmm. And the idealism that both he and Kennedy shared, and you can see it. I mean, you just look at the American University speech when he says, you know, we are all mortal and we all inhabit this planet. Nobody else had said that. Mm-hmm. I don't think anybody else has said it since.
Probably not, yeah.
With conviction anyways. Mm-hmm. But he absolutely meant it. He wanted to end the Cold War. He wanted some kind of going to space with the Soviets to build bonds everywhere.
Camaraderie.
He wanted to end international poverty. Mm-hmm. Desperately wanted to end it. He started the Peace Corps, an army of people going out to, instead of create war, create peace. Mm-hmm. Boy, that was unheard of. Talk about a threat to the standing convention of the time, the standing powers that be. No wonder he was assassinated. He wanted change, and change for the betterment, not just of Americans, but the whole of mankind.
Mm-hmm. That's such a wonderful picture, too. And that's the scenery I like to see. And unfortunately, it seems like we're going in reverse here, which has me very concerned right now on this timeline, watching the world fall apart before my eyes. And it seems like it's all driven by greed and fear and programming and just so much negativity. I mean, ruthlessness, no respect for the life force, no respect for the soul. And I don't know what's happening. I mean, it's just shocking to stare at this whole stage of what we call this planet and the scenery behind it and just watch this all playing out. So we definitely need more people like what the Kennedys and others who were actually ready to take a stand on the highest level and help us out. But man, what do you think?
I think democracies like this, and this is something I've been preaching ever since I started my show and beforehand, and democracy is this precious little gem, folks. And we all have to be proactive. Whether you have an online internet radio station and do great works like Solaris does, and Angela does, and everybody else on Revolution Radio, you're out there making a difference for your fellow man. You don't have to agree to live together. You can disagree to disagree. You can agree to disagree, I should say, but the dialogue is what makes democracy work. Ideas, and you have to be proactive. Sitting back and saying they should. Once again, we've got that dynamic reversed. We, the people, the three most important words that mankind has ever uttered to each other. We, the people, have control. And it's time we take that back.
Mm-hmm. Well said. Well said, Brent. Yeah, for sure. Well, I mean, that's why we're here. So
Absolutely.
And hopefully people will take their power back step by step and piece by piece and do it peacefully and without all this violence. I mean, I'm just so tired of the negativity and the violence. I'm sure everybody else is too. But after a while, it just becomes numbing to see all that going on, especially the stuff in the Middle East. That's just insane. So, it just...
The loss of life is... It's more than tragic. It's criminal.
Right.
You know, never before has the world had the ability to not only there's the music, to not only feed each other, but also to get the food.
Absolutely. And Brent, we'll be right back. Everybody stay tuned. Ravenstar Wishing Hour.
See you in a bit.